Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. Today I finally have for you my January wrap up. I'm sorry it's taken so long. I planned to film it a couple of weeks ago and then I've been ill and there's been so much going on with work and stuff, so I have had to delay it, but I'm bringing it to you today. I've got a load of new stats that I'm going to be talking about, so we're going to start off at the top of the video with that and hopefully you'll find that interesting. A lot of these stats are coming from the spreadsheet that I mentioned in a video a couple of weeks ago, so I'm going to link to that video so you can check out all the different steps I'm covering. I've actually even added to that spreadsheet since I made that video. So I read a total of 7 books in January. The total number of pages in those books was 2,692 now. Because of the way I track the reading, some of those books I would have started before January and only finished them in January, so it doesn't necessarily mean I read all of those pages in January, but that meant the average length of book was 384.5 pages, which is kind of a good average. That's a good number of pages to have read in a month. I will say that in January, due to my mental health, I was having a lot of trouble concentrating on things and settling down to things, so I actually started a lot more books than what I finished, and that will be reflected. You'll see that in my February wrap up, that I finished a lot of books in February that I started in January because I really struggled to concentrate on them in January. I could only focus on books that really gripped my attention, and that's kind of reflected in the ratings as well, actually. So at the start of the month there were 566 books on my Goodreads TBR, and at the end of the month I managed to get that down to 563, which doesn't sound like a lot, but bearing in mind that most of the books I read were from the library in January, that's actually not bad. My book death row count started at 27 and at the end of the month was on 28. So while I'm talking about book death row, I will say that of the 2 books on my book death row that month, one of them I didn't read. That was 10,000 Sorrows, which I don't have with me. It's in my on haul pile. I just wasn't in the mood for it, didn't want to pick up, so that one's going. The other one, The God of Small Things, you can see I'm about a third of the way into it. So this was one of the books that I started but couldn't concentrate on, couldn't finish. I nearly DNF'd it a couple of times, but I had someone, I can't remember her channel name, I'll put it on the screen, and I'll link to her video. She talked about how much she loved this book, so it made me actually want to persevere and carry on reading it. It's got some quite troubling content that you have to be in the right frame of mind to read, which is why I still haven't finished it and I'm reading it in small doses. At the moment I am planning to carry on with it, but I don't know how long it's going to take me to get through. The new stats that I've added since making that video about my stats tracking are how long a book has taken me to read and how long it's been on my TBR for. So what I read, actually, comparatively, most of these books I finished quite quickly from when I started them. I was already logging the date I read them, but I've now logged the date I'm starting the book on and then got a formula to calculate how many days it's taken me to read. The book that took me the longest took me 25 days to read, and the average length it took me to finish these books was 8 days. Which isn't too bad, really. The other stat is how long books have been on my Goodreads TBR. Now I say that books I'm borrowing from the library don't actually go on my Goodreads TBR, I only add them to Goodreads when I start reading them because of the amount of times that I take books back without actually starting to read them if I've had them out for a long time and haven't got around to them. But helpfully, both of my libraries that I'm a member of, you can actually look on your online account and it tells you when you've got a book out. So I've added that as on my TBR since date, and then the other books are books that I've owned. I put the date that I added them to Goodreads. Well, I say that some of them have been on my TBR for longer than that and I hadn't added them, so I've tried to, if I hadn't added them to Goodreads when they went on my shelves, then I've tried to figure out the date that they've been on my TBR since, even though that is not an exact science. So most of them it's from when I moved into this property, because a lot of my books were in storage when I started to use Goodreads. Anyway, that's a really long way of explaining that the book that was been on my TBR the longest, that I finished in January, had been on there for 113 days, and that was a library book that I'd had out for a couple of months. And the average length of time they were on my TBR was 52 days, which is quite short compared to some of the stats you're going to be hearing about for February, because I've been tackling some of the books been on my TBR longer in February. So the next set of stats is where books came from. So 1 book was from my own TBR and 6 books were library books. In terms of the type of book, I read 1 hardback book and 6 paperbacks. Didn't read any ebooks or audiobooks. In terms of the genre or type of book, I read 1 non-fiction book, which was a Christian non-fiction book, 1 contemporary, 2 science fiction, 2 fantasy, and 1 magical realism. The author's nationalities, I read 4 different nationalities. I read books by American authors, a Taiwanese American, an English author, and an Irish author. And in terms of the gender identities that I could find out of the authors, I read 2 different gender identities. So that was cis female and cis male, cis woman, cis man. So I'm already aware that I need to branch out my nationalities a little bit more because I read a lot of American authors in January. Definitely need to branch out on my gender identities and try and read some more marginalised gender identities. So I actually am reading at the moment a book from a non-binary author, but I would be very happy to receive recommendations of books from trans and non-binary authors if you would please let me know of any ones that you think are good, particularly in the science fiction fantasy genres. For my challenges, I read 3 books from independent publishers and I completed 2 series, which was really good. That's a good start to my challenges. In terms of diversities, I read from authors who are Black, Asian and minority ethnic, authors with a disability or other diversities, and for diversity of characters, I actually managed to read at least 1 book that represented all of the ones on my list. So that's Black, Asian minority ethnic, LGBTQIA+, disability rep, mental health rep, neurodiversity rep and other rep. So actually in terms of character diversity, I think I did pretty well in January of reading a range of books about different identities. And then finally on to the ratings. So I had a very successful month in that all the books were 4 or 5 star rated. So I read 3 books that were 4 stars and 4 books that were 5 stars. And so now, after all of that really long introduction, I'm actually going to talk about the books. And so I can see that in the future my wrap-up videos are going to get really long if I'm not very careful. What I could do, and let me know if you'd be interested in this, is this month I'm going to do it as 1 whole video, but maybe next month I could split it into 2 things. So I could do a wrap up talking about my stats and diversity and then a wrap up talking about the books. Let me know what you think of that idea, or whether you think I should keep it all in 1 video, which could mean that the videos would be quite long. That's just an idea that I've just had, so let me know what you think of that. So anyway, so on to talking about the books. Most of these books I got from the library, so I will be picking up pictures because I do not have the physical copies anymore. I've returned them because we're now most of the way through February. So the first book that I gave 4 stars to was The Astonishing Colour of After by Emily Axar Pan. This is magical realism. It is about a young woman who her mother has died by suicide and she is trying to come to terms with that, with the death of her mother and that great loss in her life. She also has a conflicted relationship with her best friend who she is not sure if she has feelings for him or not, and it's a very confusing time because she has been trying to figure that out, and then her mum's passed away and so she's confused about that. It's really bad, I've forgotten the character's name because it's so long ago that I read these books. She is Taiwanese American and she starts to have this sort of vision of her mother has returned as a bird, as a large red bird, and so she's trying to get hold of her mother and find her, and then she gets a message that suggests she should go and visit her mother's parents in Taiwan. So she and her father head over to Taiwan, and then he essentially is, he's grieving as well, so it's kind of understandable, but he doesn't get on with his wife's parents, so he just leaves his daughter there and she doesn't speak the language. And anyway, but there's a whole lot of sort of magical elements going on. There's sort of a couple of sort of ghostly characters, and I just thought it was really beautifully written, really covered these concepts of grief and depression very well, very sensitively, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I really did. It was very vivid. The magical elements were done really well, that it worked. For me it worked. And that's a book I've been meaning to read a long time. I've heard a lot of good things about it, so I was really excited to get to it. The next book that I gave 4 stars to was The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal. This is an alternative history science fiction novel. It is set in the 50s at the start of the space race, but in this world a meteorite, I think I've got that terminology right, has hit the Earth and has wiped out most of Washington DC and the surrounding area and has caused what is going to be catastrophic climate change in a few years' time. So the main character, again I've forgotten her name, this is why you should film wrap-ups like right at the end of the month. She is a scientist and her brother's a meteorologist, and between them they figure out that this is going to cause a massive impact on the weather, like on the planet's weather systems, starting with a colder period and then massive increase in heat. She and her husband both work for the space agency, and they are really pushing to encourage more investment into space sciences to try and have an exit route to be able to get people off the planet before this catastrophic climate change happens. Her ambition is she wants to be an astronaut, and there's a lot of battling with the patriarchal systems that are trying to keep women out of the space system and stop them being astronauts. So she and her friends who are pilots are trying to constantly prove their worth, and there's quite a lot of good diversity wrap in it, because the main character is a Jewish woman and she is challenged on her attitude towards people of colour, because she goes into situations as a white woman knowing that she's marginalised because of her identity as a woman, but not really thinking about sort of intersectional marginalisation. So she doesn't think about how even more marginalised her black friends are, for example. She challenges herself on that and tries to become a better ally to the people around her. Also really good mental health wrap in this book. As someone who was dealing with anxiety at the time I was reading the book, the main character is also dealing with anxiety, a slightly different situation to mine, but it was just really nice to read about someone who was dealing with that anxiety, and also a lot of misconceptions about how that affected her, because her anxiety was very situational about public speaking. She didn't like public speaking, and she was constantly being pushed to represent women in space industry on TV and in interviews, and so she had to start taking medication about that. And then people started questioning whether it was right for her to be involved in the space program because of her anxiety, and like, well, actually my anxiety affects me in a similar way. It's at the moment very focused around driving, being in vehicles, and it does sometimes tip over into other aspects of my life, but it doesn't prevent me from doing certain specific things. And so it was a really good conversation about how mental health can be really situational. So I really enjoyed it. It didn't get 5 stars. I can't remember why. There are a couple of things that I just, when I was reading it, like, I have to really, really love a book to want to give it 5 stars, but it was a really good book, and I'm hoping to pick up the next book in the series soon. And then the final book I gave 4 stars to was called Leonard and Hungry Paul by Ronan Hession. This was the Ninja Book Club pick for January. This was just a really lovely read. It's very sort of mild-mannered, I would call it. It's just about sort of ordinary people living fairly ordinary lives. The two main characters, Leonard and Hungry Paul, are friends. They've grown up together. They are both very quiet people, and it's about their friendship and their families and the day-to-day things that they get up to doing and how their friendship works and how they gently challenge each other to be better people. And it was just really lovely, a really comforting read. And it was one that I wouldn't have picked up, and I nearly didn't pick it up. And I hadn't planned to read it, but then I saw that the library had it. It was a nice book. And I don't say that like any sort of detriment to it. If you just want something that is quiet and uplifting and will make you feel better about life and the world, then this was a lovely book. On to my 5-star reads, and I realise I'm not saying a lot about a lot of these books, and that's partly because it's been a while and I don't remember a lot about them, but never mind. So the first book I gave 5 stars to was actually the first book I finished this year, which was King of Scars by Leigh Bardugo. This is the latest book in the Grishaverse and the first book in the Nikolai, I don't know whether it's going to be a duology or a trilogy. So I'm now up to date on the Grishaverse, which I'm quite pleased about. It's taken me a while. So that was one of the series that I got up to date on or finished in January. I did really enjoy this book. I think Leigh Bardugo's writing has improved with every book, and I think some people struggle with some of these books because, so the Grisha trilogy was definitely YA. The Six of Crows duology and now the this first Nikolai book read older, and the characters have aged. They are older than they were in the earlier books, so to me this reads as new adult, whereas the Grishaverse probably read as young adult. But I mean, it's probably like upper end of teenagers. I don't know, it's really difficult. It's sort of a blurred line. Anyway, because I wasn't reading it with it being in my head, it being a YA book, it has that sort of fast-paced feeling. A lot of action happens. There's been quite a bit of character development, and I think I like this book because a lot of the characters that I liked in the previous books come back in this book again and have their stories developed. And I thought it was a really interesting development of that world. I mean, on reflection, if I reread it, I maybe wouldn't get 5 stars again, but because I was really enjoying it, because it really gripped me and really entertained me, that's why I gave it the 5 stars. I haven't gone a lot into the synopsis because you kind of have to have all the background of what has happened in the previous books. Even though it's a new duology, I wouldn't recommend reading it unless you'd read all the other books so that you understand the context of what is going on in it. The next book that I gave 5 stars to was the second book I finished this year, which was Ancillary Mercy by Leckie. This was the final book in the Imperial Raj trilogy, which was one of my favourite series of last year. If you saw my favourites of last year video, I really love these books and I really love Leckie's writing. This was a really great finale to that series. The series follows Breck, who was a former AI of a troop-carrying spaceship called the Justice of Torin, and the ship was destroyed and she just has this one human body with the entire consciousness of that artificial intelligence implanted into it. That's all that remains. There's sort of a bit of a civil war going on in the Empire, and Breck is caught up in the middle of it. At this point she's been sent to monitor a planetary system by one faction of the Empire, and yeah, it's very complex. The world is really complex, and I just really loved how the story had developed over the 3 books, and particularly the ending of it I thought really worked. But what I also really liked was it had the resolution of the story, and then it had a little bit afterwards of like the day-to-day stuff that's going on, which is nice because it makes the world feel like it continues after you finish the book, which is something I really love. I mean, I don't hate when books just end, but if a book has a really big climax, it can sometimes feel a bit like, okay, but what happens after, where this massive stuff has happened and then it just ends. So I like that this book had sort of this big conclusion and then it had sort of a gentle conclusion as well of, okay, so this is the day-to-day stuff that's been happened since. I really do recommend that series. If you like sci-fi, if you read a lot of sci-fi, I think if you're new to sci-fi, then I wouldn't recommend starting with this series, because there's a lot of sci-fi tropes and conventions that will be easier to follow if you have a bit more of a grounding in science fiction. So I would suggest, if you really love sci-fi, you will probably really enjoy these books. So I've talked about how much I love the series a lot, so I'm not going to go into too much more detail about this book. Then the next book that I gave 5 stars to was another continuation of a series. This was Windwitch by Susan Dennard. I have finally read it. I've been meaning to read it for months and months and months, and I finally read it and I really, really loved it. And again, I thought it was a great continuation of that series and I'm excited to carry on. I do have Bloodwitch, which is the next book in the series. I'm going to try and get to it soon-ish, but because we don't have a release date for the 4th book, I mean, I'll be bereft once I have to wait a really long time, but then I'm gonna reread the other books probably again before the 4th one comes out. This book again picks up where Truthwitch left off. It follows all the characters, but they're now spread out. In Truthwitch, all the characters' storylines intersected and they were all interacting with each other a lot. In this book, there's a lot more separation, a lot more division, which some people have criticised the book for that, because one of the real strengths of the first book was the quality of the relationships, of the friendships, and particularly between Safi and Isolde. And Safi and Isolde are not together in this book, they are completely separated. But to me, I didn't mind that, because I know that at some point the characters are all going to be reunited, and that's sort of what I'm hoping for and looking forward to, and that's what kept me going. It's like, are they gonna get back together? This also had a trope that I decided I really like of, they both think the other one's dead. In one of the ships in the book, like, I mean, in terms of romance ships rather than actual, there are actual physical ships in the book as well, but in terms of one of the romances, they both think the other one's dead, and it's like, I can't wait for them to find out that they're not. Yeah, I love Susan Dennard. I love that book so much. I was slumping hard because I picked up so many books that I couldn't get through, and then I was just like, why am I putting off? I know I'm going to enjoy it. So I just picked it up and I just read it, and it was so good. There's so much love for that series. And then the final book is the only one that I actually have the physical copy of. This is Steel Angels by Magdalen Smith. So this is non-fiction, this is Christian non-fiction. This was my theology book club pick for January. So this is The Personal Qualities of a Priest. Magdalen Smith is a Church of England priest. This is her reflections on what it means to be a priest. It's based around the selection criteria that the Church of England have for choosing people to be trained as priests, and I just found it really encouraging, really moving. There's a lot in there that is more general as well, not just about specifically the role of a priest, but actually the supporting roles around that, or like general day-to-day Christian people in churches and what they can do. But there was just something so encouraging. Magdalen Smith has a really beautiful writing style, which I really enjoyed, and if you're interested in finding out more about the Church of England and what priests actually do, if you don't know much about that, or vicars is another name for them, then I found this a good introduction. So I'm not going to say too much more about it because I have been talking for a long time. So that was my wrap of all the books I read in January. Let me know if you read any of them and what you thought of them. Let me know what you think about my idea of splitting it into 2 videos, a stats wrap up and a books wrap up, if that's something that would interest you, or if you'd rather keep it all together. I'm just aware of how long these videos take me generally to film when I'm just talking about the books, and if I'm talking about a load of stats as well, then it can make it a really long video. So anyway, let me know what you think about that. Please like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't already. You can also follow me on my social media. I'm on Goodreads and I'm on Twitter, so if you want to know more about what I'm actually reading right now, then Goodreads is the place to go. And if you want, I don't know, general life and a bit of book related tweets, then Twitter. So the information about my social media is always in the description box for you. Yeah, and stay tuned for more videos coming from me soon. But that's it for today, so thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye.